Hello, folks. I see some of my, hi, Cindy. Hi, Shaw.
Hi, Mommy.
Dominic Piers, yay. Yay. Sandra.
Hi.
Yay. And Shaw. So we've got the main actors here. That's good. Lovely to see everyone. And we will just get started in about 1 minute. I want to bring my participant screen up. There we go. Yeah, welcome, folks. It's great to see you here.
Ooh.
I imagine we may have a number of people floating in because I've certainly heard from a lot of people about being here. So I'm just going to go to the top of the hour and then I'll start muting folks just for the sake of background noise, of minimizing background noise, I should say. So yeah. How many? There we go. And Cindy. And it's good to see you. And welcome. There are a few folks I don't recognize. That's great. Always love to see some new faces. Joel, hello. Nice to meet you. Okay. All right. I've got 11 o'clock on the dot here in beautiful Suquamish, Washington, west of Seattle. And I am Molly Gordon, and this is a new old story considering ICF coaching in the tradition and within the standards and frameworks of the International Coach Federation from a three principles perspective. And I have 4 panelists with me today and a number of coaches at various places on their career I know who are participants and many other who are going to watch. One thing I want to say about that is this is not the entirety of the conversation. We have 90 minutes today to explore some things, and I see this as the beginning of a conversation. So I'll be posting this video to all the various social networks where you may have heard about this, and looking forward to ongoing conversation with everyone who's interested in that following this Hangout. So this is just a beginning. I've been muting folks as I can as they come in so that it limits the background noise. There will be an opportunity to ask questions, make observations, and share comments. I'm going to ask folks to do that first through the chat. And then I can unmute you and you can speak it into the room. That just helps us manage the flow of the conversation and keep background to a minimum. I know you may think your background is quiet, but actually it's probably not. Just saying. So a couple of things before I introduce our panelists about Zoom that if you're not already familiar with Zoom, you might find helpful. One is that you can turn your video on and off. If you are on a computer and you mouse over your screen, at the bottom of the screen, a band will come up, a navigation bar. And you can click on the video icon. On my Mac, it happens to be on the left at the bottom. That will turn your camera off. So if you don't want to be seen for any reason, you're chewing or you're moving around or all the things that are coming to me that I am not going to say in this moment, just turn your video off if you like. Same with your audio. I'm trying to mute people as you come in. You can also mute and unmute yourself in that scroll, that navigation bar. If you're on a tablet or a phone, you may have to fiddle around. I think there are 3 little dots on the screen. If you click on those dots, you'll get some options. So what else do I want to say about Zoom? Again, use the chat to raise your hand and ask questions. And we are recording this. And I will be posting the recording far and wide. So if you do not want to be recorded, audio or video, please be responsible for managing your audio and video so that that doesn't happen. Just excuse me while I pick up a few of these folks who have background noise. There we go. And again, welcome everyone. So I'm Molly Gordon. Some of you are familiar with me from other wholeness hangouts or from my work as a coach. I've been coaching since 1996. I did come into coaching through the traditions of the International Coach Federation and was a member of ICF and joined in 1996. So that's been my home base for many, many years. A few years ago, 6, 7 years ago, I came across the 3 principles and I went, holy crap. This is what I glimpsed when I came to coaching. This is what coaching was pointing to and maybe didn't quite know. And this both changes everything and deepens everything, and you'll hear more about that from me and the other panelists. But what happened to me is I immediately saw a relationship. It wasn't like this makes everything I've been up to nonsense, but it does ground and contextualize everything I've been up to in such a way that about 80% of it might be nonsense. And what remains is simpler, clearer, and more potent than what I had seen before. I love to develop coaches, and I love sharing the 3 principles and seeing how my life and my clients' lives are changed through this understanding. And I'm very grateful to be joined here by 4 other coaches at various places in their journey. For the sake of this particular exploration, I did choose guests who are or have come into coaching through ICF accredited programs, because I particularly want to look at where the overlap or congruence is and where there are gaps, and see what we can learn from that. So my guests are Dominic Scafidi. Dominic has been coaching corporate clients for nearly 10 years. He is an ICF professional certified coach. He's a certified executive coach. And Dominic is also a graduate of Michael Neal's Super Coach Academy, which is a coaching school in the 3 principles tradition. Shah Pereira is a graduate of Coach Masters Academy out of Asia. And Shah is a newer coach. She came across the principles in August last year, and she's in the process of applying for her or earning her ACC or Associate Certified Coach credential. So she's more on the beginning part of her coaching journey and on the beginning part of looking at the principles and how they are or are not connected to coaching. Sandra Koenig trained at the Coaches Training Institute, one of the earliest coach training programs. And she is a certified professional coactive coach, as well as an associate certified coach credentialed by the ICF. Sandra is currently on staff at Michael Neal's Super Coach Academy. And through that academy, she has earned the Advanced Certified Transformational Coach credential. And finally, Piers Thurston has been a full-time coach since 2001 with over 10,000 coaching hours, working with a range of business and private clients. He has been coaching from the 3 principles understanding since 2011. So we've got quite a range and breadth and depth of experience here. Let's see. Just to check in once again, I think I've got everyone muted, and I want to make sure I unmute our guests. And to open this up, guys, I thought I would ask each of you, Piers, Sandra, Shah, and Dominic, what makes this conversation important enough to you that you would be here? Because I know that each of you have other places to be and other things you could be doing. Piers, would you like to start us off with that?
Sure, Molly, thank you. And it's a pleasure to be here. So for me, the reason it's so important that this conversation is out there is, I guess in a nutshell, I wish I'd known earlier about this understanding. So I trained in coaching back in 2000, also lots of NLP and all sorts of things like that. And I did that way for sort of 8, 9, 10 years. And I wish I'd known about this understanding, because it would have debunked a lot of the things I was trying to do. I had some success, in that form of coaching. It wasn't that it wasn't successful, but as soon as I understood this understanding, it clicked, and I realized I've been slightly aiming in the wrong place. So in a nutshell, it's because I want other coaches to realize the power of what we're doing, and I wish I'd seen it sooner.
Thank you, Piers, for the visual. We'll go back around, because I definitely will be wanting to hear more about what you saw, Piers, in the principles that you're wishing everybody could know sooner, that you could have known sooner. So thank you for that. Sandra Koenig, how about you? What makes this conversation worth being in today?
I think for me, because I'm I'm working for Michael and mentor coaches through the Super Coach Academy. I care, and I've always cared a lot about this profession. Like even when I went through the coaches training institute and got certified, I was very involved in the community in the San Francisco area, because there was a whole movement afoot of how do we regulate coaching, and pretty much anybody can say they're a coach, trained, untrained, and how do we do that? And I never got past the ACC, because I was getting ready to apply for the PCC a few years ago, and I found the principles, and I just gave up on all that. I was just like, okay, my work is going a totally different direction. I'm not gonna go after kind of the ICF levels anymore. And yet I do think there's something really important about having an organization that certifies coaches.
Mm-hmm.
and that could sound kind of outside in, but I think it would elevate our whole profession,
Mm-hmm.
and including what we're doing in the principles. So I love the idea that you want to get ICF on board with what we're up to. Because I feel like I got great coach training at
Mm-hmm.
Coaches Training Institute, and learning the principles just took that even deeper.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you so much. Let's hear from Shah. How about you, Shah?
Yes, as a new coach, I actually trained in transformational coaching, and I found it a really powerful process. And a couple of months after I finished my training, I found the principles, and again, could understand that there was great power behind the principles, and really wanted to deepen my understanding of that. I can see parallels between the transformational approach that I learned. There's a point where we work through settling the client and waiting for their emerging understanding, that insight to occur within the session, tapping into their own wisdom. I could see a lot of parallels between the training that I received and the three principles, but the three principles seems that there's like a deeper belief in the client, which really resonated with me with the principles. So yeah, going through my credentialing and trying to stick with the criteria that ICF required in order to get my credentialing, while trying to incorporate the three principles. It always sort of, that kind of dance is always top of mind with me at the moment. So yeah, this discussion is particularly interesting for me at this point.
We keep doing that. It's just to build silence and spaciousness into the conversation. So thank you for being here, Shah. I am a guest instructor for Coach Masters Academy, the program that Shah trains in, and I was actually doing a Meet the Coach webinar in October 2015, I think. And because the Coachmasters Academy serves primarily Southeast Asia and Oceania, the time zone is quite different, and it meant that I was getting up at 4 in the morning to be on this call. And at the time, I was at the Three Principles Global Community Conference in Los Angeles. So I roll out of bed at 4:30 in the morning, fire up my laptop, and get on this call. And there was just nothing to share except where I was and what I was doing there and how that related to what I was doing as a Coachmasters instructor. And it was the first time that with that particular group of people, I shared explicitly and at length about the three principles as the three principles. The principles always inform my work as an instructor, as a coach. To the best of my ability, that's always what I'm bringing, because that's what I think my A game consists of. However, I don't always talk about it as this set of principles or refer to it by that. So that was my coming out party, and apparently Shaw came across the YouTube video of that, and here she is. So welcome. Dominic, your turn.
Hey there.
Hey.
Well, so for me, I saw and could see the power of coaching as defined by the International Coach Federation. So my background is in the corporate world, and I was eventually in human resources, and so I kind of thought I understood what coaching was. And when I left the corporate world and decided to become a coach, I learned a lot by actually understanding what the distinction of coaching actually is. And the International Coach Federation, we owe a debt of gratitude because they have distinguished what coaching is as a distinction. And before that, I thought I was coaching, and I'd done a lot of personal sort of development, transformational work. So I thought that sharing that with people was very helpful. And I understood that to be coaching. And coaching is its own distinction. It is distinct from teaching. It is distinct from mentoring. It is distinct from consulting and advising. It is distinct from counseling and therapy. And so understanding what the distinction is and what it is about that distinction that makes it a powerful modality in contrast to other kinds of conversations you could have with people, to me, that was incredibly powerful. And so that was useful as I learned it, my effectiveness with clients and being able to help clients was benefited enormously. And then I came across the three principles later. And what I saw with the three principles was that it took a lot of the concepts or competencies that ICF might talk about, but it showed you how that was true. And that's not a small thing because it makes the difference between something like hold the client capable, which sounds like a good idea. And if you're going to be a coach, to hold the client capable, to believe that they are creative, resourceful, whole, and complete, that sounds like a good idea. But when I came across the three principles, that emphasis around the truth of that, right? and sort of pointing you toward the truth of that is enormously powerful. So then, my interest in this webinar specifically was about, wow, there's something that would be of benefit in terms of an integration of all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Great, thank you, and welcome, Dominic. So when I first came across the principles in 2010, I took a look. It was because I had seen a difference in Michael Neal, founder of Supercoach. I'd known Michael for a number of years, and I'd followed his work. I thought he was really smart, really articulate. And I was frankly underwhelmed by a lot of what he said because it looked like a lot of work. Like, as long as you're on this success train, if you can keep yourself on the right train, thinking the right way, remembering the right things, doing the right things, then you're going to produce good results. And I thought, yeah, that's great. And it doesn't account for the fact that some days you just don't want to get on that train. There are other ways I could say it, but there were things that I felt were missing from Michael's conversation. But one year he was a guest speaker at an event I did, and he showed up so differently that I got really curious. I mean, so profoundly differently that I had to find out what happened to Michael. And it wasn't just what he said. It was his whole way of being in the world, and also what he was pointing toward. Rather than pointing to a formula for being better and doing better, he was pointing more to the capacity, inbuilt capacity to be better and do better. There was a way in which he was speaking to the capacity in the participants in this program to show up differently, to make different choices, to tune into their own wisdom. He was speaking to the actuality of a personal GPS system rather than the advisability of developing one. So I got really curious. I chased down some videos by his mentors, the Pranskys, and I have to say, at first I wasn't terribly impressed. I saw one video with George Pransky, what are the 3 principles? And George laid out the 3 principles, which I can do for you, and it probably won't do any more for you than he did for me, because it was very conceptual. It was like principle of mind, the infinite intelligence behind life, the oneness of life, the principle of consciousness, the capacity of awareness, the screen or background against which our experience becomes true or real to us. The principle of thought, that formless energy that mysteriously crosses the border into form, and in the form of thoughts, in the form of ideas, in the form of actions, in the form of perceptions. And I'm kind of nodding my head. Among other things, I was a certified facilitator of the work of Byron Katie. So the idea of thought, the idea that experience was generated from the inside out, didn't seem like news to me. And I just kind of rolled my eyes and went, well, duh. But again, Michael was so profoundly changed that I kept looking. And finally, I went to the source, and the source of the 3 principles is a man named Sid Banks. Sid was a welder in British Columbia with a 9th grade education, and somewhat like Byron Katie and Eckhart Tolle and numerous other people over the years, he's just innocently bopping through his life, not particularly happy, and he gets photobombed by an enlightenment experience. And the way Sid articulated what he saw in that experience and what continued to unfold for him, he eventually came to articulate in terms of these 3 principles. Sid, teaching these over and over again, would say, don't listen to my words. Don't listen to these definitions. Listen for the feeling beneath the words. Listen to the spaces between the words. Again, if you followed any of the great spiritual teachers over the millennia, they all pretty much say that. Don't get caught up in the words. And as I listened to Sid, at one point, I heard him say something like, there's something in you that understands, this is not what he said, but what I heard was, there's something in you that understands what I'm talking about. And when you sense that something, throw this tape out the window and go have a nice life. And what happened to me was I went, huh, there's something in me that knows exactly what this man is talking about. I've recognized it when other people have talked about it. There have been moments in my life where I've just spontaneously recognized it in myself and for myself. What would it be like to just pay attention to that, to realize, to allow myself to make real the realization that we all have this capacity? So that was one game changer, was to wake up to what I knew how to know. The second game changer for me was seeing psychiatrist Bill Pettit, who was a student of Sid's for years, talk about innate well-being or innate health or innate wholeness. And when Bill talks about working with the most seriously disabled psychiatric patients, people with florid paranoia and schizophrenia, extreme manic episodes, and what Bill sees is the health underneath all that noise. And as I was listening to him talk about this, something in me just dropped down and got it. And I thought, yes, I've seen that in people, and I have in my own life. I've seen people seriously mentally disturbed, and I have been graced with the ability to see them as whole. And in seeing them as whole, was able to connect with something whole in them. So those just happened to be the two things that shook me out of my conceptual trance of trying to get the principles into an experiential realization that there was something profound here. When I post the replay to this, I will post links to some people who will do a better job than I just did of pointing to the what of the principles, so that if you're inclined and you're going, okay, what are these three principles people talking about, there will be a place for you to go and get those questions answered or begin to have them answered. But bottom line, this realization shook me to my core. I thought, what would happen for me if I took my capacity to see truly and to navigate truly as a given? What would happen for my clients if I stopped believing in their capacity and started seeing their capacity? And how would coaching change if we looked in that direction? There are many other ways I could talk about this, but that's a starter, and I want to get my voice out of this conversation now. So I'd like to hear from the panelists and feel free to adapt or reshape this question so that you can give an answer that feels fruitful and meaningful to you. But the question I came up with is, how has your encounter with the principles changed your coaching, and in a way that matters? Not just functionally, what are you doing differently, but what are you seeing differently, and how do you approach it differently? And why does it matter? Piers?
Yes, well, that's a great question, Molly. So I think it's changed it dramatically in terms of the impact I'm having and what I'm doing as a coach. So if we just look at the impact to start with, I used to get some great shifts in my clients' work, in their lives and work from what I was doing. I used to use a combination of sort of coaching and LP, all sorts of things. But the order of change that happens once someone has a sight of what we're pointing to with these principles is a different order. And although from the distance it might look the same, because what turns in their life might look similar, you can just tell by how someone shows up to the world and some of the things they say. So, I mean, these are just trite sound bites, but people would say things like, this has changed me at a cellular level. I feel my soul is reactivated. Everything looks different. You know, I feel like I've got this to the moment I die. You know, and those weren't things, I mean, they're just sound bites, things I was getting with my previous coaching. I was making great changes in people's lives. But so the order of change is different and so sustainable and pervasive. And I
to clarify, you mean order as in like magnitude, not sequence, right?
I mean order as in magnitude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the pervasiveness and the sustainability of the change. I mean, it's the definition of transformative, right? I was possibly using that word before, but I didn't realize what transformative was until I came across this. So the order of magnitude and sustainability and pervasiveness of the change is different. And the direction of, and it's similar to what you were saying, Molly, the direction of where I'm pointing my clients is totally different. So I'm not working on, what they should think or what they should do in life. I'm not prescribing anything like that. I'm not even enabling them to want to work that out. I mean, that does come out of it, but that's not what I'm pointing. I'm not even helping them understand who they are or who they want to be. It's more, what are you, or what are we, and it's pointing them to see how the human system works psycho-spiritually, and how those beautiful things that we all hear about in the spiritual world turn up practically, and helping them to connect the practical and the profound. And they see that, and I'm just pointing to that. And it's nothing to do with outcomes at one level. So all the things they might come to coaching for on their shopping list of things they might want, we don't really talk about those things overtly. I mean, we might do a bit later on when people are seeing the implications of this understanding. But to start with, I'm just pointing them to see and realize for themselves how their mind works, how their spiritual, psychological cells unfold. And then the rest of the outcomes sort of either dissolve or take care of themselves. So it's the orientation of the coaching is totally different. It may, from a distance, if you were just listening in to the odd bit of the conversation, may sound like I'm doing it was similar to before. But if you're in the conversation, you notice it's totally different.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Piers. Panelists, who'd like to chime in next? Sandra, did you raise your hand? Go for it.
Yeah, I was inspired by some of what Piers was saying. Part of my background is, prior to learning the principles, when I first became a coach, I had left the world of branding. I worked in branding, large multinational companies for years and years. When I became a coach, I thought I was going to leave that all behind. And shortly after I became a coach, I had an insight on how I could bring coaching back into that conversation. So a lot of the work I was already doing when I stumbled on the principles was working with startups and entrepreneurs on creating their brands from the inside. And when I learned the principles, it felt, I'm going to try to articulate something I'd never articulate very well, but I felt like I got to see more clearly what I had already been seeing for years and years. That there's this very practical aspect to really turning towards what we call mind and the principles. And that has profound impact on business. So it just deepened the work I was already doing with businesses and with entrepreneurs. Like it felt like it just strengthened it. And then what happened for my clients was so much more. It's similar to what Piers is saying, is just so much more what happened. So much more movement, so much more transformation in their personal life. Like, even though I'm very, in that aspect of my work, I do some regular coaching, mentoring, and then this branding stuff. Even in the branding, people's lives were changing, even though we were just kind of talking about their businesses. Because once you start to see this, you see it everywhere. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So by pointing, it sounds, Sandra, like before even the principles, before coaching, you had seen something about the value of working from the inside, perhaps from your values, from the things you care about. There was a way that you were pointing people interiorly for inspiration and direction and branding.
Well, not before I became a coach. Before I became a coach, I was working at a strategist. I could come in and I could evaluate a big company, tell them the direction their brand should go, and then also do the visual branding. And then when I became a coach, I started to see the power of looking inward.
Okay.
And then the principles just deepened that.
Yeah.
Like what I had already been seeing just got clear. And, I'm sure you can feel like I get very excited about it.
Yeah.
I try to not go
Yeah.
overboard talking about it.
One way that I try to express the shift that I think you're pointing to is like coaching introduced me to a world of potential with clients and into a relationship with that potential. The principles showed me that there really is a there, that it's not just a bunch of human development, human potential happy talk, but there's a foundation for that happy talk. And that has been profoundly orienting and grounding and simplifying. I don't have to talk you into yeah.
Oh, and I sorry to interrupt you, but
No,
I
that's
feel
perfect.
like what also changed in my coaching, instead of talking about the future with people, I was talking about now. Like all this is possible now. It's not a lot of coaching is future goal oriented.
Mm-hmm.
Like instead of like the potential of here right now is feels more what the principles is about.
Oh, wow. Very cool, Sandra. I just have to write that down because I'm taking brief notes for next stages in the conversation. But yes, a lot of coaching is very much future oriented, and the principles reveals that immediate potential in the moment.
And it can, anything, your whole life could shift in this one moment, like just one insight into the principles.
Yeah.
Can shift your whole experience of whatever direction you're looking at, business, your personal life, your relationship.
Which also speaks to the kind of the leverage, the order of magnitude that Piers was speaking to. If the shift happens down here, it affects everything up here. If the shift happens out here, it only affects from there on out. So there's a level of realization that translates into immense leverage in life and work. Great. Shah, Dominic, who's up? Go, Shah.
So I don't actually share a lot of the principles yet with my clients, mostly because I'm not quite sure how to do that. But I think it's my own grounding in the principles that's actually supporting me at the moment and in supporting my client. So it's that understanding of the thought feeling connection. It's the understanding of our connection with the I don't know, source energy, whatever you want to call it, and how that moves through us. That's my understanding of that directs me as a coach, which I think facilitates the conversation that I'm having with my clients. But directly sharing it with clients, I think I get very conscious of not tapping into a mentoring mode, and I'm still very much coaching, with questions and so when I watched a lot of Three Principles coaches as a new coach, it sort of confused me because it seemed a lot of it was mentoring, and that's why we had this conversation, Molly. So for me, I'm still deepening my own grounding, and I'm trying to find the nice the way that I can incorporate the Three Principles more into my work, because I see the power in it and I want to share it, but I want to share it in a way that is not instructive. It's coming from it's still coming from the client, if that makes sense.
Well, it sounds like you're calling it mentoring. The way I saw the challenge was teaching. How much is coaching and how much is teaching, or how much is telling. And I certainly had a whole set, and sometimes still have questions about that. And I'd love to unpack that a little more as we keep going today. Thank you.
Sorry, what was that?
The relationship between, I don't know if that question was for me or if that was random background noise. The relationship between among mentoring, teaching, and coaching when it comes to sharing the principles. So I think that may have been an accidental intrusion. Dominic, how has the principles changed what you do and how you see your work as a coach?
So I think first off, that I do see my work as a coach. So I kind of want to put that out there based on what Shah just said and what you, the comment that you made there. I don't see myself as a 3 principles teacher or 3 principles mentor. I'm not, that doesn't call to me to sort of teach this anywhere. It occurs to me like that it's just true, right? three principles is just true. There's something about realizing it. And then kind of like gravity, it is operating. And so it's very useful that you realize that that is operating, right? So that there is something called gravity and it operates. You can't see it, but it is there. It does affect you. It has a lot to do with what's going on. But there's not a lot of people that are kind of out in the world teaching about gravity either. Right? So we all kind of, so from a coaching perspective, my clients come to me and they are interested in something, right? So they are interested in their outcomes. And I haven't really met any that would be all that interested in sort of understanding more about, you know, how does the world work? How does my mind work? How does any of that work? But they're very interested in the problems that they have or the challenges that they have. And what 3 principles has done, because it does weave in and comes in, there are some clients where the way the conversation goes, it very explicitly gets into what might be 3 principles, but they are drawing that out of me. In other words, I like to say that you cannot answer a question that is not being asked. And so I'm unlikely to be talking if it's not in response to some sort of a question, right? So, so if the client is asking and drawing, then we can kind of move in a particular direction. But in the meantime, it's the impact that's happened is that when clients would come with whatever the problem is, prior to the principles, there was much greater risk of believing it, right? So that believing that there really was a problem and that problem or that condition or that circumstance really was an issue in the way that, you know, the client described it. And with the principles, understanding that there is nothing that the client is experiencing or no circumstance that they are facing, which is not thought created. So that is the only thing that they can experience is a thought-created reality. They can only have a thought-created experience. So that's changed my sort of engagement with what they talk about and my interest in what they talk about and what I ask questions about. So it's very little about that versus what it is that's creating that problem or that issue. And so as a result, the impact of the coaching has been much stronger in that it obviously goes deeper because it goes to the source of what is in front of them that is such a barrier or a problem or whatever they want to describe. And it impacts it faster. So much faster kind of instant results versus, drawn out like you would get if you sort of tried to attack these things in a more logical kind of manner like that. So there's some. Can
you give an example of that last piece, Dominic? Does one come to mind? A situation?
Recent, if I think about, I think about one CEO client that it's a family business and there are relationships issues that would often happen in that. And in one of the sessions, showing up to talk about this particular relationship challenge or issue. And I would have in the past gone into that with them. So really gone into it to understand what was going on and then help them, how to either, like Pierce said it very well, how could they think about it differently? What are some tools that they could use? This is kind of, what would have happened in the past. But from now with 3 principles is I was able to point them back to, well, what, really asking the question about what is the problem? What is that experience? And that upset that you have, or that anger that you have about this, or the feeling of betrayal, where do you think that that's coming from? Mm-hmm. And, and so as we know in 3 principles, and it takes, they would say, wow, it's because the person did this or the person did that. And then ultimately where they got to see that, oh, that's just thought. That's just a way of thinking. And so it was amazing because when we went forward, there was absolutely no dealing with that problem or that issue. And quite miraculously for them, the issue just disappeared.
Yeah.
So they just kind of went on to the path of whatever they wanted to do without dealing with the issue, and it literally disappeared. And in the past, it could have been, a whole plan to kind of deal with that and turn it around and change it from a problem into something a little more productive. So that's quite an impact in my coaching.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. When I first came across the principles, I was doing more coaching and training combined with groups of tiny business owners, not tiny people who own businesses, but people who owned tiny businesses. And I was so excited that I took what I was learning to these groups, and I just said, God, you guys, I got to tell you about this thing. And I just blurted out whatever it was that I understood at that time. And it wouldn't have been an attempt to conceptually share the principles, but I shared some story about the impact they'd had on me. And I was dazzled, totally knocked out by how that touched the people I was working with, and how they each went on to have some version of their own insight. I thought that was very cool. As I started to do more individual coaching again, my first round of this was very clumsy. I threw out, or thought I was supposed to throw out, 20 years or 16 years at that point of ICF training and life training, and proceeded, this is so embarrassing, proceeded to batter my clients about the head and shoulders with my insights and the principles. This did not appear to have a profoundly positive impact. Some clients were kind and patient, other clients were irritable and cranky, and most people were bored, disgruntled, and discontent. So I invested in training with Pransky and Associates, some of the Sid Banks' original students, and did a mentorship in the principles with them. And one of the recordings I submitted for a supervision with George Pransky, George came back and he said, in the nicest way possible, nicer than I'm going to say it, he said, your grounding is really good. In other words, your understanding and your clarity and conviction about the principles, that's great. Your coaching kind of sucks. And I thought, wow, maybe I made the wrong choice here, throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And I think there were 2 things that I had misunderstood. One thing that I misunderstood was that in the principles, we often talk about, this is not about tools, techniques, models, practices, because it's not. The principles are a principled level, like gravity level understanding of the nature of reality. And there isn't a tool, a model, or a technique that is one size fits all to support or convey or catalyze an insight into these underlying principles for clients. that said, and the metaphor that helped me as someone who's also been an artist in her life is that if you're painting a painting, a paintbrush will not give you inspiration. When you have inspiration, a paintbrush is a really useful thing to have. So I began to see coaching skills and experience as qualities, characteristics, and skills that I could bring to the table to support an engagement human to human in a conversation about how life works. And I didn't have to throw out my skills so much as not let my skills come between me and my client, and not let my model of a coaching conversation come between me and the potential for my client to have a useful insight. And third, the other big thing I saw was that I was thinking about all of this way too hard. And the degree to which I had a lot on my mind as a coach, the amount I had on my mind as a coach was inversely proportional to my effectiveness as a coach. The less I have on my mind, the better I coach every time. So it's been a dance and an exploration for me. And there's also this question about teaching, because to share principles may look like sharing teaching, but as I looked around at many of my MCC peers, they were sharing teaching things like relationships matter, connection matters. It's not like expert coaching is absent of content. I think that's a myth. For me, coaching, and I appreciated your bringing in the distinction of coaching, Dominic, because this is just how it looks to me right now, and I'm willing to be wrong. I frequently am. But I do think that it's useful, intriguing, and valuable to consider coaching as a particular modality, a different kind of animal. And for me, that modality is one that supports clients in the process of creating things in the world of form. Making things happen, accomplishing things, painting paintings, building companies, figuring out how to have a better life. What the principles does for me as a coach is shows me that if you want to be effective out here in the world of form, it really helps to understand where all of that comes from, which is back here in the formless infinite potential. And to support clients into having their own genuine insights into the relationship between that infinite potential and the finite product of our efforts and our work is the best thing I can do for them. Because 100% of what gets in my way and of what gets in my client's way looks like a misunderstanding of that relationship. Like, we become very focused and concerned about fixing something that's already been created, called a problem, instead of realizing that where that problem came from, there is infinitely more potential. And that you can, I call it projectizing your problems. I've got a difficult relationship, so I'm going to projectize it, and I'm going to work on myself, and I'm going to work on the relationship. Or get a fresh look at the potential for relationship. That may sound really vague, abstract, and conceptual, and when you're engaged one-to-one with a client in looking in that direction, and they have an insight into the actuality of that potential, it changes everything. So I see coaching as a profession that works at the border of formlessness and form, that supports clients, and sometimes this includes teaching clients where experience and where form comes from, and helping them have an authentic, genuine experience of that, what I'm calling a potential. And then I'm happy to support them in any way I can, including any tool I might have in my back pocket for figuring out how to move forward in the service of their insight. So I don't, in the beginning, I saw it as either or. Either I can produce insight or I can produce action. Now for me, coaching is the role, and this is part of what it distinguishes it from other roles, that works in both territories, that supports action and is fully aware that the choices we're making are made up and that there's more where that came from. So that's just my 2 cents.
Could I add something?
Of course, please do.
I love what you're saying, because I didn't want to interrupt you, but I didn't want to forget this sort of thought. Like, one of the things I see that I think gets confusing in the 3 principles community is people get so excited when they learn this. I certainly did too. And I did something similar to you, where I think I kind of destroyed my coaching practice because I wanted to teach everybody the principles, and it wasn't why they were coming to me for coaching. And I do think that there's an element of coaching of really honoring the client's agenda, like not our own, but like, what are they there for? And there's ways you can be pointing towards the principles and inspiring insight around the principles without ever teaching them or kind of forcing them on somebody.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds kind of horrible, but
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I have a lot more impact when I stopped trying to teach the principles,
Mm-hmm.
even though I'm completely committed to them.
Yeah. Thanks, Sandra. I did some coaching recently in conjunction with a ICF coach training program that I was working in, and did a couple of demos during my classes, and they were short and necessarily unfinished. So I agreed with each of the demo clients to have a separate coaching conversation, but we could work to completion. And in one of them, the client was working with rage. And the problem, as she saw it, was that she sometimes had this uncontrollable anger. It created problems in life, it created problems at work, and she wanted to work on that. And I don't remember exactly what I did, but I did a pretty ICF standard intake and agreement. What do you want to have different? Will you know it's different? What do you think that you need to learn or consider or address for this to be different? Looking at all those things. And then at some point, and I don't remember exactly where, but at some point, what I saw was that she had a misunderstanding about what intensity means when it comes to feelings. And one of the things that I came to see in the principles is that just because a feeling is strong doesn't mean it's significant. And it looked to me like if she cleared up that misunderstanding of coding intensity with significance, that she might have a different experience and a different relationship with this anger. And I forget exactly how I said it, but first I got permission. I was working within an ICF framework after all. I said, "Do you mind, may I share something with you that I think may be useful for you to consider?" She said, "Sure." And I said something to the effect that feelings tell us about the flow of thought in the moment, which could include any number of things, from the weather to what you ate last night to how they done you wrong to anything else. And a feeling in the moment is about the totality of that flow of thought. And it's not actually telling you anything about your partner, your husband, your child, or the driver that cut you off. So I just invite you to consider that feelings aren't telling you about your circumstances, and they're also not telling you anything about you. And I don't know why. You never know why. In or outside of the ICF and the principles framework, something will land with the client. And she got it. She saw something profound about the separation between thought and feeling and reality. that how she was feeling was not giving her reliable information about how well she was doing, or about how she was being treated, or about what was possible for her next. And then I did a few minutes of coaching, what probably looked like coaching, to help her articulate, or invite her to articulate what she saw and kind of bring it down to earth, ground it, embody it, whatever. And to check for her understanding, and we wrapped up. So there was a teaching element within the context of what most of us as ICF coaches would recognize as an ICF model coaching conversation. And I did step outside and I taught her something, in the sense that I pointed her at something. I think that's more accurate. And this is what I learned from my first abortive attempt to teach the principles. You can't actually teach the principles. And you can teach the definitions, which aren't particularly helpful. You can teach them as concepts. But the real service is to help catalyze insight into the principles. It's what people see for themselves. And this is something that I see coaching has had right for a long time, that our profession, and I think it's the reason why ICF says no teaching, no mentoring. We want clients to own their insights. We want clients to come to their own learning. And I agree with that 100%. I think that we've gotten, we in the ICF have gotten preoccupied with the form of that and with the prescription for that. And so we're throwing out whole gobs of potential conversation and engagement that can be useful in service of something that's tremendously important. But I think we have a misunderstanding about what it is that gets in the way of clients owning their own insight. Dominic, Shaw, Piers, anything about this you want to add or challenge or say differently?
I can add one thing.
Yeah, please.
I've been listening and just nodding and agreeing with everything that people have been saying, and I over my own last sort of 8-9 years of getting into understanding, have been into, you know, purely being a 3 principles teacher and throwing away all the coaching, everything, you know, because to start with, I was hybriding. When I first got into this, I was hybriding. I couldn't help myself. It was coming out of my mouth, but then I would chuck in some techniques and some old coaching as well, just to make sure it wasn't too weird. And then I went the other way, and I've been all over the place. And I think where I've got to now is that, you know, just as Sandra was saying, to me, it's about being client-centric, not principle-centric. If you're principle-centric, you're going to tell everyone the principles whether they want them or not. Client-centric is you listen to where that client's at, and then it seems to me 9 times out of 10, it makes sense to share the principles, right? But that's not a rule. It's just what happens. But one thing I have noticed is you were talking about sometimes once they've seen something, you then might help them inform with some more conventional approaches or whatever. And the one thing I've noticed is that when I used to do that a bit more, I would find that their desire to go back to that sometimes misled them, because you were like chucking a life preserver back in the water for them. And so what I found was, actually, even though I might have a tool or technique up my sleeve and they've seen the principles, I'm not sure I'm going to give them that right now, because I want to see where they go. And if I don't chuck the life preserver back in the water, guess what? They'll see something. So it wasn't that necessarily there wouldn't have been value in me giving them some of that. It's just I wanted them to keep going back to seeing this.
Yes.
And be quite pure on that. Doesn't mean I do it 100%, but just because the more they start to see it and trust it, even in situations they wouldn't have done, because it looks like, well, surely this is about form now. It just seemed to help. Will be my only sort of add to what you've all been saying, which I've been nodding and agreeing with.
Yeah, I think that's really important, Piers. And I noticed that in coaching conversations, sometimes I actually had one this morning. Where clients saw something about, my mind is such a sieve today. He saw something, just take it from me. And then I circled around at the end and helped him also make a list of some things he tried to confirm some actions he was going to take. And I felt the energy change, the level of energy change. And I just noted it for myself. I'm going to find out next week when he reports back if making those lists, really short focused lists, help sustain him, help him move through, or if they distracted him from the insight, which itself would have provided momentum. So I'm really appreciating what you're saying and right in the exploration of that with myself and my clients. Absolutely. Nikki, thank you. I was on a 3P call. Nikki, would you like to come on and share your question? I think it's a good one.
That's not very clear, is it? Not
well
written.
It's probably clear, but for me to read it instead of you say it.
Okay. I was taking an online 3P, how to share the 3 principles course with, and I probably was the only ICF, certified coach. And I just recertified last in 2017. So I'd just taken ICF has that new ethics module. And I had just taken that and it was fresh in my mind. And I was really clear that some things aren't the domain of coaching as per that module. And they kind of walk you through that. And when I was asked, we were doing the final of a 12 session training. And I was actually given somebody's situation. And it was about somebody, I don't know, having some form of mental challenge. I can't remember the particulars. And I said I would probably refer them based on that I'm a coach and not a therapist and that kind of thing. And I got total pushback from everybody, which was around the 3 principles can't ever do any harm. And other people said they had worked with people that had various things. And so I guess as we're looking in this, there's sort of a bit of a gray zone, I think, sometimes. I mean, I do find that there are some things being done by 3P trained people that I would say, for me, seem more therapy oriented. And maybe they're having results. And I really don't want to be in the position of being a 3P judge or something like that, of somebody else's practice. But I'm curious about that. And I'm curious when I see people say in the 3P community, I've cured this and this and this. And to me, I think when I first started out as a coach, and I've been coaching for like 18 years and certified for 15. And I think early on, I thought I could do about anything with my coaching skills. And, the humility that comes with being able to refer, I feel more and more free in knowing I'm not the coach for everyone.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's a leading question. I'm just very curious how others see that.
I'm curious how others see that too. I tend to see it the way I'm hearing you're seeing it. But Piers, do you have a thought about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just don't see, and this sounds very trite, but I just don't see mental illness anymore. So I can't really think it doesn't fit in. So however deep the hole is that they might be in, I don't see that as a problem. I just don't see it. So I realize they see it. It's real for them. So I would never ethically draw a line anywhere. I might decide I don't want to work with that client because I don't think I'm the best coach for them, but that'd be nothing to do with my ethics. So because I also don't see, I think therapy, mentoring, coaching, counseling are just names for labeling things that we might do and have different, sort of groundings to. But I think once you see the principles, I think that all dissolves. So would someone say, well, that sounded a bit therapeutic, what you're doing? I would go, well, I don't know. I mean, so I personally don't have anything on that. Now, if someone was watching my coaching from the ICF, they might think, well, what are you doing? I think they probably would. But I just don't see it anymore. I don't see those distinctions. They've just dissolved for me.
Yeah. Sandra, do you have a thought on that?
I actually trained as a therapist maybe 20 years ago, and I did maybe 1,000 of my hours towards licensing in California, and then walked away from it because I didn't enjoy it. And it's something I've had a lot of thinking about. Like I'm very clear I don't want to be doing therapy. Like, so if somebody comes and they're wanting, I don't know, there's some people, I just trust my own guidance. Like, this is just, I'm not going to give them what they want.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll refer them to someone else.
Yeah.
And I do think there are a lot of people in the principals, a lot of the people that the big teachers are all trained therapists. And so I do think there is a flavor to what they do that feels like therapy. And it can be quite subtle. And it's not to put down what they do. It's sort of like why I hope there's a flavor to what I do it feels more like coaching. That's my intention anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it's not to make any of it wrong. And I think we all have to decide. And I mean, I loved hearing what Piers was saying, because I think at a certain point, like, I do see as my grounding changes, I see less and less mental illness. And it always surprises me when I do. Then I think like, oh, I'm caught inside myself. And there's some people I wouldn't want to work with, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make, I don't know if that really answers.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that any of us have the right or final answer on this.
But I just mean that my opinion is my
opinion.
opinion.
Yeah, your opinion certainly made sense, Sandra. And what I heard so far that both you and Piers said is, I may, for whatever reason, not want to work with someone. And, you know, conceptually, it looks to me like I could work with anyone. But in reality, I notice I don't click with everyone. And I know that that's an inside-out phenomena, that's an expression of my thinking in the moment, or of thought moving through me in the moment. And it's still what I've got to work with in the moment. And I don't choose to take on my every thought and revise it, you know, or look for a new one. So I talked to Bill Pettit briefly about this once. Bill, again, is trained as a psychiatrist. And he observed that mental health professionals have some adjunct training, including being able to assess people's physical safety, whether or not they present a threat to themselves or others. And that's not training that I've had. So would I feel up to having a therapeutic conversation with someone? Yes. Do I think I'm the right professional to stabilize them or intervene with them? Or, you know, it's like, what's the goal? What's the purpose of the engagement? I feel like I'm lacking a lot of chops that a trained 3 principles therapist or mental health practitioner might bring to the table. And so that does seem to me unethical, to whether it's in coaching or any other business, unethical to agree to do something that I don't assess I'm in a good position to do, or that I don't want to do.
I just add one more bit. I think for me, clients filter themselves out. So in what I call the intake, the initial conversation, if someone approaches me, I'll be so clear about what our work's going to be. If they've come referred from someone else, they probably have a sense of it, but let's assume they haven't. I had a client recently, well, potential one, who wanted to work with me. I heard something I said, and then when I talked about how we'd work, she had loads of thinking how that wasn't going to be enough, because she was used to therapy, which would be, you know, this long and this often, and she said, well, how could that work? And I explained again about what this was going to be compared to what she was used to see whether she was open to shift a little bit of her thinking already on it. And even though she wanted to work with me, she had so much thinking about how it should be, that how we should work together in the form, in the structure, that I realized it wasn't going to be right for me, right? It wasn't going to be right for us. There wasn't going to be enough movement in it. So we decided it wasn't going to be the right relationship to have. So she didn't become my client, even though when she first contacted me, she really, really wanted to work. And then when I explained really honestly what we were going to do, She kind of filtered herself out. I had to tell her that, but so it just sort of happens. You see, if you're really clear up front about what it is you're going to be doing, whether they're ready and open for that kind of thing versus a traditional therapy, which would be a very different format.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Dominic, Shaw, anything you guys want to add to this?
I think what's really important in this is the ICF credential or definition. There is no issue when it comes to ethics, so long as you're not, an ICF credentialed coach, right? So, and coaching is unregulated. So, I mean, there's no regulation around using the term. So you can use the term and you can really say that you can work with anybody and you can have conversations with people, helpful conversations, and get results and all of that. So the only place there's an ethics is because ICF says, the International Code of they say that if they will credential you as a coach, you must agree to abide by that code of ethics. And so why is that important? Well, out there in the world, I don't know to what degree it's important. If you're getting clients on an individual basis who are paying out of pocket, so they're personally paying you for coaching, it's generally, in my experience, not at all important. They make their own decisions. They kind of have a conversation with you and they can make their own decisions about whether or not working with you would have an impact or make a difference. Most of the work I do in the corporate world, there's usually an intermediary, and so that you'll have the human resources organization or some group within the corporate environment that is vetting coaches. And so that's not to say they wouldn't have non-ICF credentialed coaches. I mean, I come across all kinds of people like image consultants and people that will work with executives on speeches and communication and all of that. Now, they do not say that they are coaches, or I mean, they actually can say, and many of them do call themselves coaches. But what they're not claiming is that they're not claiming they're an ICF credentialed coach. Right? So I am. Yeah. So the minute I claim I am an ICF credentialed coach, now there's a code of ethics I abide by, and that there are certain things that I will and won't do. And so within the corporations, as they assign me to clients, and I think this part's important, is that they know that I'm not working with a leader to teach them something. They do not assign me to work with an executive to teach them my philosophy, to teach them my better view of life, to teach them the truth that I have come to see, right? So that is not why they hired me. And so I need, the fact that I see certain truth is great, but I must use a coaching approach and a coaching style in my work with them. And by the way, whenever we say coaching, it is in the world of form. Coaching does not exist in the formless. So coaching only exists in the world of form, and by a consensus agreement, in this case, if it is the ICF, there is a particular distinction called coaching, and it is distinct from teaching, mentoring, and all these other things, unless you have a client who's willing to pay you for just helping or just making a difference with them, and you don't have to distinguish for them what coaching is, and you can work with them any way you want, right? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of...
Yeah, thank you. Shaw, anything you want to add to that?
I guess just as a new coach, it's tempting to, when a potential client shows up, it's tempting to take on board any client that you can possibly get, being new to it all. But at the same time, I'd be very conscious of a client that I didn't feel I could support, or didn't feel ready to work with. So yeah, I'd be quite, it would be quite easy for me to refer them on to someone else in that respect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Martha has a question in the chat about practitioners, 3 Principles practitioners, listed on the 3ppc.org website. To be listed on that website, you fill in a brief application stating what your experience and training in the principles is, a few other things about yourself, and then you go through an interview with one of the board members. I don't know how evolved that process is. I've done it, and they talk to you about your understanding of the principles and how you use it in the world. So somebody's listed there has been at least through that. It doesn't mean that they're the only person in the state who is using the principles in their work. The 3PGC, which stands for 3 Principles Global Community, defines practitioner as someone who uses this as their sole modality. So I'm listed on that website, and I live in the question of whether or not I'm using it as my sole modality. And I noticed that Bill Pettit hasn't quit practicing psychiatry, so I think there's room for an integration, but I don't honestly know how they draw those lines. Yes, Piers.
I'll just add one more thing on that. I don't know whether it still is, but it used to be that you'd have to have been doing that for 2 years.
Yes.
Before they would consider you.
Thank you. You're right. It was last year when I applied, or the year before.
I was also going to say I've never applied because I'm still never clear that I even understand enough.
Yeah, which is kind of funny in the context of the principles that we're not sure about the form that they want you to fill out for the principles.
I think this is what I'm doing, but someone else might have a different opinion.
Yeah,
it's very subjective. I mean, I was lucky enough to be, after doing Super Coach, go and do the One Thought Institute with Aaron and the Pranskys, and they said, right, in 2 years' time, you can come and tell us, you know, you can go on it, right? Because we've taught you, so we know what you'll be doing.
great.
It actually didn't take. I could have completely changed afterwards. They wouldn't have known.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I was still working with them, so they probably did know. But I think it's very subjective.
Yeah, of course it is. We have about 10 minutes left, and 2 things. I would like to invite everyone who has not asked a question but has a question, including maybe a not clearly formulated question, to take a moment and jot down that question. You can put it in the chat, or I'll also put my email address in the chat. Send it to me. I won't publish it or attribute it. I won't attribute it to you unless you want it to be attributed to you. But I really honestly want to know what questions are showing up that we might address in further conversations on this topic. And I'd like to give the last 9 minutes now to the panelists to tell us the way I thought of this question is, what would you like us to take away from today? And if there's a more meaningful thing that you'd like to leave with viewers and participants, you can change up that question. Basically, what do you want us to be taking away from this conversation? And I'll give you a moment to do that, and I'll put my address in this. Piers, do you have a thought about what you'd like people to be taking from this?
I think it's whatever you know about the principles, even if it's nothing or a lot, stay curious to see what you see about them. I think the thing that bowled me over is, over the last sort of 8-9 years I've been in this, is how much more I see about what I thought I knew. Mm-hmm. So I would have said, when I finished Michael's thing in 2011, or when I finished with Pransky's in 2013, I'd got this. I knew the principles, right? I knew this understanding. Oh gosh, no, I didn't, right? And I don't think I ever will. So all I would say is my one nutshell thing would be, whether you know nothing about them, get curious about them, or what they're pointing to. It's not really them, what they're pointing to. If you think you know them all already and don't think they're going to fit into your coaching practice or whatever, stay curious. Just stay open. There is an infinite amount to see in what looks like a small direction, you know, 1/2 inch wide, infinite deep. Just stay curious, stay fresh, and then it will just evolve into whether that turns up in your coaching practice or not. So just stay open and curious, and there's an infinite amount to see. it is the most wonderful thing. I'm so grateful to have fallen into it.
Right. Thank you. There's a question. This is the first time I've heard of the principles. What are some resources to learn more? I will follow up with an email with those resources, and I will also post those resources to the event page that you clicked through on to get here. So the replay and those resources will be back on the page that you clicked on in order to get to this conference. Sandra, what would you like folks to be taking away?
I guess I make the assumption that most people on the call are coaches or interested in being coaches. And I do think that no matter what our grounding is if some understanding of this, that we can have more impact, and that to just trust that.
Great. Thank you. Great. Shaw?
Yeah, I think for me, this has been such a good, interesting discussion for me at the stage I'm in. And I really feel like there's a place for both the ICF trained coach and the three principles, bringing that together, where I didn't kind of see how that works so well before. So if you are ICF trained and you're interested in the three principles, I think you'll be a more impactful coach by bringing those two together. So I'm looking forward to kind of delving into that, of how to do that a bit more.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Shaw. And Dominic.
Yeah, well, for me, so the assumption is if you came on the call, that there was some interest around ICF coaching and the three principles, or something about the integration of that. Because I mean, there's lots of 3P calls where they're, talking about coaching or talking about all of that, sharing the principles. So I think there was something about the integration of those two. And, it was interesting because I hadn't done this, but sort of like in thinking about this call, I went through the ICF competencies and I was looking at them, and it's like immediately from the start, I could see the alignment, right, between kind of where 3P is. And like, in other words, you can't even think about being an ICF coach. Its applicant will not pass this competency. That's the very first one. If they focus primarily on telling the client what to do or how to do it, right? And meanwhile, if you think about three principles, if you were grounded in three principles, that's the last thing you would do, right? Like that there's no way that you would go in that direction. It wouldn't make any sense. So and I flipped through all of the competencies and I was mapping them and looking at those competencies and how they aligned so well with three principles. And what's great about three principles is that you're grounded in it. You literally see insightfully how that makes sense or doesn't make sense. And so it's different than kind of, trying to become an ICF coach. Well, you'll become an ICF coach trained by an accredited institution. That's the only way you're going to do it, right? But it is, more than getting all of that as a concept. And so for me, the power was that three principles made these things, which I first saw as concepts, made them really come alive and see the truth in them. So,
Great. Thank you, Dominic. That's kind of a nice, gives me a nice segue to a question I often hear from people, ICF coaches, is like, how can I use the three principles trainings I'm doing or getting for credit for my continuing coach competence? For brain melt, for CCEUs, whatever they mean, continuing coaching education units. Right now, I'm not aware of any principles-based programs that have applied for that. Principles-based programs can apply for that. I'm working with Jamie Smart to explore the potential for getting CCEUs for his Clarity Coach training. There's also a way to make a case, at least the last time I checked. You can describe the training you took, do what Dominic just talked about, go through the competencies, and challenge yourself. And I think this is a really useful exercise if you're an ICF coach. Challenge yourself to articulate how that 3 principles training addressed or helped you develop that competency. And I think it's an easy case to make for active listening, powerful questioning, coaching presence, developing trust and intimacy, creating awareness, and potentially for designing actions, planning, managing accountability. All those tend to be more transactional. They don't have to be. And even the coaching agreement. I've watched Aaron Turner coach for a year, and he creates a robust coaching agreement every time. So you have to make your own case for that, and that's part of the burden of proof is on the applicant if the training organization has not taken it on themselves to get that approval. I'm available to consult and coach with people who are wanting to do that. So thank you everyone for this. I will be having at least monthly and sometimes more than monthly Wholeness Hangouts on this theme and related topics. Your questions, concerns, pushback are essential for framing those conversations. I'm deeply grateful to our panelists, Piers Thurston, Shaw Pereira, Dominic Scafidi, and Sandra Koenig, and to all the people who have knocked their socks off, worked really hard to create the culture we have in ICF and beyond ICF in the principles. So thank you very much. And yeah, Pierce says he did this once and it was turned down. That's no guaranteed process, but I'm happy to take a look for people. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.